Greetings and welcome to Connect Africa. This is a platform where we bring social, economic, and political issues of Africa and decolonize knowledge based on research. And today we're going to be discussing about medical colonialism and taking as a departure point the recent comment made by the two French doctors about testing COVID-19 vaccines in Africa, which is made publicly by media. And for this, we invited Dr. Yirga Gelaw. He will be joining us. And just to say a few words about Dr. Yirga. Dr. Yirga Gelaw Woldeyes is a senior lecturer, critical researcher, author, and Amharic poet. He works at the Center for Human Rights Education at Curtin University, Australia. His book, Native Colonialism, Education and Economy of Violence Against Traditions in Ethiopia, was published in 2017. The book contributed to the theory of native colonialism, a process whereby a country colonizes itself with foreign or imitated ideas and institutions. Currently, Dr. Yirga researches the process and impact of collecting and holding African intellectual resources in museums and libraries in the West. He also comments on emerging social, economical, and political challenges facing Black people in general and Africans in particular. We are really pleased to have him here at Connect Africa, and he will be joining us in a second. Okay, Dr. Yirga, welcome to Connect Africa. The reason for our meeting today is actually by the comment that's made like probably 10 days ago by the two French doctors regarding the vaccine for COVID-19, which they say on media that actually, like what they have done before with HIV, that it should be tried in Africa or on Africans, and following that, a widespread accusation of racism has been made by the social media, especially. So going through that, I came across with this interesting note from you. From Facebook, which was really an enlightening one for myself. And then I think most of Africans don't know this, including myself. So I thought if you can share with us, there's an interesting historical reference that you made there in the note. Actually, you're saying this medical colonialism is not new, and the thinking behind these two French doctors is nothing new. It has been there and it's still done. Can you please share with us that and your general thoughts, this medical apartheid, yeah, if I may say so, in Africa or against Africa?
Thank you, Mahlet, for inviting me, and I think it's wonderful to share some thoughts with fellow brothers and sisters of Africa and African origin. And I think you are right when those two doctors made a comment about testing COVID-19 vaccine in Africa, and they did that in open television. Without really feeling that it would be wrong to say so, because you can understand that there's a culture of acceptance in using Black bodies or Black people as testing grounds for anything that might benefit humanity or the West. Mm-hmm. And I think they said two specific things as reasons why they think testing this vaccine in Africa would be very good. One of the comments relates to how Africans live, what type of life exists in Africa, and they said Africans live without protection. They don't have good medical facilities. So the African space provides a natural context to test the efficiency of a drug. If you have a very good medical system and you are unwell, it's likely that you can get some kind of medical support. And it would be very difficult to know which one is the effect of the drug you are trying on the patient. But if patients do not have alternative places to go and get medication, then you will have a very big chance of testing the efficiency of the drug you have at hand, because the only thing that patients get is what you give them. And that type of experiment has happened in Africa in many ways in the past. It's not only that in medical field, but generally in a whole way of understanding Black people in the West. The entire existence of being Black, being African, was perceived as people living in a state of nature, as people who are primitive, who live like wild animals. So doing some kind of tests like that relates to this public negative consciousness or pessimistic consciousness that has been the product of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism now in Africa, or financial capitalism in Africa, or all over the world for that matter. So I think one of the point that they say is, it's important to understand is the context in which they put Africa within the wider consciousness that people have about human beings. When they say, let's test it in Africa, in everyone's mind, it resonates well. It's not offending anyone, because the understanding is that Africans are living in a state of nature. They don't have anything, so it's okay to use them to benefit humanity in the same way we use animals to benefit us. And the second point that they made was, they referred to some kind of precedent that they have. We have done this in relation to testing HIV/AIDS, and that's interesting, because I can comment a bit later about what happened in Africa in testing HIV or anti-AIDS drugs or antiretroviral drugs in Africa. So those are two things. One, presenting Africa as a place convenient for testing new things like drugs. Second is talking about Africa as a place that gives us an experience in testing new drugs in the past, like anti-HIV drugs. So those are the two things that I can say about these doctors. But if you want to ask me about some of these historical references, what happened, I think we can also talk about that.
Yeah, I think it would be nice to share.
Yeah, I think one of the very important lesson that we have to take from this is a very good understanding of our relationship with the existing system, global system, or a Western capitalist system that exists in the world. And the backbone of this system, or the most important support for this system, comes from racial hierarchy, based on the belief people have about the hierarchy of the human races. And because we have lived within this system for the last 500 years, we sometimes don't really feel it. It's like swimming for a fish to have a consciousness of what water is, because it doesn't have the experience of what is life outside of water. The fish would be it would be difficult for the fish to understand what water is in the same way we understand it from outside. So for people who are swimming in a world that is organized racially, it is difficult to understand how this structural, systemic form of oppression has been constructed for the last 500 years. And when we talk about colonialism, many people focus, or most of us focus, on colonialism of places, like white Europeans coming and colonizing a country, administering it, and also physically oppressing the population and so on. But there are many forms by which colonialism has perfected itself to the level that it becomes like like the water where the fish are swimming, that level that we don't really feel that it is even oppression or colonialism. And that happened as a result of how colonialism works in the mind of human beings, by giving knowledge that presents the world based on the experience of the colonizers. And I think that is a very important point to remember, because we talk about colonization of places, but we forget that even our very identities, even our very bodies are also part of that colonial infrastructure. And the medical racism or the medical apartheid that we see in the world is a reflection of the colonization of the human body, or the black body, as a natural resource, as an entity that can be used to improve the larger society. And this was done throughout slavery, throughout colonialism, and so on. If you take the example of slavery, there's a doctor called James Mario Sim, which is regarded as the father of gynecology. And many people in the West celebrate him for bringing progress in for women's reproductive health, especially during delivery, or when they delivering a child. But people forget how the process Dr. Sim used to acquire that knowledge. He basically performed very harmful and painful surgical operation on women, black women, that he acquired as slaves. He performed numerous operations until he perfected his ability to repair a childbirth complication called fistula. Now, and also he created also a medical instrument called the Sim speculum, and a kind of instrument that doctors used to examine the female body parts. So we understand that James Mario Sim, he's got significant name and riches in the world, that were used as guinea pigs to function his work. We can also take example from Jamaica around a time when a person by the name John Queer went there and experimented on slaves. He infected around 850 slaves with smallpox to test if these people can develop a kind of immunity to the disease. And in Africa too, if we go to places like Namibia, everybody remembers the Holocaust, how Jews were murdered by the Nazis in Germany, which is a very sad reality and important to remember as well. But people forget some of the techniques that were used against the Jews came from the experience of some of these Nazi doctors in Africa, especially in Namibia. If we go to Namibia around the beginning of the 90s, there was a doctor called Eugene Fisher. He went there because he wanted to purify the white race. He saw some Dutch men having children with the local Hottentots, and he was experimenting sterilization, forcefully applying sterilization techniques to purify the race. And he used those techniques against the Jews when he came back to Germany. He became a director of a very respected medical anthropology institute. He was given that title by Adolf Hitler himself. Mm-hmm. He was a trainer of SS soldiers. He was even a judge in Berlin's hereditary Hell's courts. So all of those evil ideas came from the experience of these people. There are also others, like Dr. Bonfire, for example, who also brought ideas using different harmful techniques to operate or to treat scurvy and so on. And we can also mention many others,
True.
So
it's interesting when you talk about actually what the Germans, the Nazis did against the Namibians, and also the sterilization. Because if you know, also the Jews, meaning now the Israelis, have performed the same exact thing against the Ethiopian Jews in Israel by giving them this Depo-Provera as a contraception, which actually sterilize them. Many scientists, they say that the name Depo-Provera, it's nothing, people still use it, but there has been several accusations also by the Israelis that Israelis are using that against the Ethiopian Jews to sterilize them. So to see that chain is really interesting, what have been done against them and then them doing it against Black people there.
I think there's I think that's a very interesting point to make because a lot of people have the consciousness of genocide being only happening in Europe against the Jews, and they forget or do not want to acknowledge the genocide in Namibia, for example, when the Germans exterminated 2/3 of the Horero tribes there. They killed 75% of the population. And that is genocide, but it's not regarded as genocide. And you can understand how, the hierarchy of races make some people particularly human and others subhuman. As a result, of course, Israel, the Jews that went and become now in the country Israel, they also, I think, brought that white consciousness, that view that to be a human is to become more white than Black. But when you talk about Depo-Provera, it was actually first, I think, in Zimbabwe, where Depo-Provera was used as a means of controlling population or numbers. It was tried on Zimbabwean women, and also it was used by plantation owners there, forcing their workers to be injected, the females to be injected with Depo-Provera so that they don't have they don't have children. And also you find other practices happening there too. There's this case of Dr. Carson in Tanganyika around 1937, where he was infecting people deliberately with the agent that brings the disease called trypanosomiasis. So many things happen.
It go on. But it's really interesting. We can also put it under this video later on. If you can suggest also books to read and where we can find all this information, I think for those who are interested, it would be nice. When I go to my second question, the question might sound lame, but I think it's really important to make it clear. Why is this, especially when we talk about COVID-19, why is it so important for the Western to come and perform this in Africa, where the number of cases are relatively less than Europe or America? Why is it so important? Is it because they really sympathize with Africa? Is it because they care more about Africa than their own people? Obviously not, but why is it's so important? And I think related to that, the main question is Africa really beneficiary with it? Do we benefit with it? And also, why Africans should be concerned about COVID-19 vaccine right now? To make that statement in black and white, I think also it's important for our viewers.
Yeah, I think we can mention a few more examples to show us why, especially pharmaceuticals or people who produce medicine will be very interested in finding places where there is less ethical restrictions in how they try their drugs. And we can take the case of Pfizer, for example. This is a big pharmaceutical in the US. And, you know, when there was a meningitis outbreak in Nigeria around 1996, this company went there to try a new drug called Trovan. And they recruited about 100 children who show symptoms of meningitis, and they gave to at least half of them, they gave their new drug called Trovan, and also they gave the existing drug with a very significantly low dose to the others. And the children that they treated, at least 11 of them or so died. And Pfizer was accused of doing this experiment on human beings. Finally, they paid around $75 million, and they were able to avoid being sued. So what that case tells us is that, you know, whenever an outbreak happens, like meningitis in Africa, for example, the West does not really show the willingness to give the drug that they have in their hand. They want to find another way to make sure that the medicine they give will bring them money, revenue. That is a basic interest behind it. So there is the ethical dilemma. The ethical dilemma is that, you know, these people, at least, you know, within the system, the medical system, there's no as such a sense of morality that makes human lives more prioritized, more important than profit. You can take the example of the Tuskegee case in America, where for 40 years, people were denied of treatment for syphilis, and they were following them to see the impact of the disease on untreated patients. And this was not done by some bad or racist individual. This was done by the American government. The CDC was following them, and it was President Clinton who apologized later on. So many of these people died and also passed on this to their family, and the men to the women and the women to their children and so on. So one of the dilemmas that we have is within the system, within the medical system at least, although there is a talk of ethics and so on, there is double standard, there is racism, and there is the primacy of profit over life. And that has been demonstrated in various cases in the past. So one critical question then in relation to this is, you know, what Africans can do or cannot do is, it's really very tricky. We can take the example of HIV testing, for example. HIV was found first, I think, in 1981 in the US. It was only after 2 or 3 years that they found cases in Africa. But the moment they found, a year later, reports came out saying that 50 to 90% of Africans are already infected with HIV/AIDS, which was true. At that time, it was around 0.02%. And around 1991, they found some agents, some medicine. Although it cannot cure HIV virus, it can use the ability of the virus to multiply itself. So if you have that medicine available for patients, at least you can reduce the transmission. So what happened was, you know, the medicine became very expensive, unaffordable, thousands and thousands of dollars per year for a patient. And so the CDC and the World Health Organization came together to try to find an alternative medicine for Africans because they cannot buy what they have. No. And based on that, they started what's known as a placebo-controlled experiment on Africa. They recruited about around 17,000 women, and they started to give them this trial medicine to see if an alternative, cheaper medicine can be found for Africans. And that went on for a long time, but it did not become successful. So you can see when the disease was increasing in Africa, transmission was becoming very high. It will become very low dramatically in the West. And this was used in a very racist way to project Africans as highly sexualized, as not using protection, putting themselves in danger and so on. But that was created by the medical apartheid or the medical imperialism that prioritizes money and profit over human lives. And the same experiment, similar experiments also happened in relation to vaccines. There was, for example, I think it's around 2007, around 800 uninfected individuals were recruited to participate in a HIV/AIDS vaccine. So they were given some kind of agent with adenovirus. Adenovirus is something that brings common cold, but they put some DNA from the virus, the HIV virus, and then they give that to try if it works as a vaccine, and also placebo for half of them. But it didn't work in 6 months, they stopped it. But some research now are coming out showing that the people who took that experiment, participated in that experiment, especially those who took the adenovirus, have become more vulnerable than the other group. So this is all in progress, and there are also other ongoing things happening. What is very incredible about all of this is how the system, the medical imperialism or the medical capitalist system that we have, actually does not even allow Africans to develop alternative drugs of their own. There is what is known as the World Trade Organization, a deal that's signed by different countries to buy what member states produce before they resort and buy from another state. As you know, Ethiopia is trying to become a member of WTO right now. But what happened is, around 1997, the South African president, the South African parliament, created the Medicine and Related Substances Act. So that law would allow the government to buy generic medicine, which means that a medicine that has less cost compared to the medicine that's produced by big corporations. So when they did that, 40 pharmaceutical companies brought a class suit accusing the government for trying to buy a cheaper medicine from India. And the United States government and the European Union, they also threatened the government with sanctions. But of course, at that time, there was, a better level, I would say, of solidarity among people in different places, and people came out, opposed this case, and the case was withdrawn later on. You might remember people coming out in America saying Al Gore killing babies in Africa and so on, and that type of opposition helped. And of course, recently, nowadays, there are more generic medicine available for many HIV positive patients. But we certainly can say that, at least in the past, since the finding of different types of medicine for HIV, many Africans died because they couldn't afford for the medicine. So why are we worried with COVID-19, and what is the relationship between these stories and the current attempt to try this vaccine in Africa? And I think I can mention at least two important concerns. The first concern is in relation to the people who will be participants of these trials. And I think, in my view, based on the research that I did, people who participate in this trial should be treated in the exact same way people who are participating in the trials in other parts of the world. If you try a certain drug, which will be available for everyone later on anyway, for people in the US or in Europe, you need to give the same standard of care. for participants in Africa. But currently, it looks like the World Health Organization tries to follow a process of local standard care, which means that the care that will be given to participants will be the care available locally. And that comes because there is a very low standard of care in Africa. People who are participating, allowing themselves to become exposed to whatever small or big possible effects of that experiment, should be treated with the best available care in the world. And that's one important point. And I think the second concern that people have is in relation to affordability and availability of these drugs after the trial, after the experiment. Once COVID trial is done, and if any medicine is found anywhere in the world, it has to be made available irrespective of countries' capacity to afford or to buy them. So there has to be a prior commitment to say that once we find a drug, there are 4 candidate drugs at the moment, then they will be also available for Africans. So those are 2 important concerns that I have. First, the best available care should be given to participants. And second, when the drug is found, it has to be available for everyone, irrespective of their capacity to buy those drugs. And governments can commit themselves to do that, or to guarantee that.
I was thinking, especially the HIV is what happened in South Africa, as per my reading, actually. Personally, this brings us to the final question. I believe that really we Africans have been an accomplice, equally, if not more, like with the global north for the continued dehumanization of Africans. As per my reading, I don't think that this was happening without the knowledge of African leaders. In fact, some of them have benefited from the lives of the people that they are leading. So how do we really, beyond talking, how should we approach this continuation of racism in every level, including medical colonialism? And I will be specifically happy if you can relate this with your research, extensive research, and which came out as a book, Native Colonialism. How can we fight this? How can we stop it? How can we be practical about this? And just in short, because of time also,
Yeah, I think, the system we are in Africa, in particular, African states by themselves are quite new creations. The state itself, in its formation, its logic, even in its age, it's it's an average of 50 years or 60 years old state. The continent has been conquered or controlled for a long time by foreigners for a long time. So I think what is really important is throughout all these years, there are systems, not just individuals, systems, structures that make it logical for anyone working with those systems and structures to be accomplice of racism, to be part of this capitalist system. So it is important for us to really focus not just on the individuals that are doing it this way or that way, but the systems that are built for several years. And these systems has to be understood so that we can change them, so that we can transform them. If we don't understand the structures, not just individuals who come out and do some terrible things like this to free or encourage them to say those things, it is history and so on, it's very hard to really understand our oppression, let alone overcoming it. And a lot of it comes from how our mind is being used in relation to dominant knowledges in the world. And for me, at least, and as you said in my book, what I try to focus on is on the colonization or the domination of knowledge, or epistemic violence, I call it. Because when your knowledge, your sense of identity, your sense of being is taken away from you, we kind of reinvent ourselves in a new way as colonial subjects. So yes, Africans have been participating.
Consciously or unconsciously, just on that one, that's the way we change ourselves.
Often unconsciously, but
Okay.
also consciously, some do. We understand some people may really know that the things that they are working, the world is unfair, but they wouldn't be able to go out and commit themselves to liberate or to do something different. Because there are power interests, there are social interests, like, for example, where you come from. You know, there are also epistemic, the way you think. These all things also affect us. So for Africans, the first thing is to understand our own history from our own point of view.
Sure.
Our own point of view means, you know, when we see the world, we often see it through the lens that is imposed upon us. So we see ourselves always as powerless people who are simply exploited. But yes, we've been oppressed, but that's resilience, resistance, survival that brought us so far also speaks something about our story. So it is important to reconnect to the history of our struggle, the struggle of our ancestors, despite all the horrendous atrocities committed against them. How they survived, how they lived, how they dreamed, what stories they tell to themselves and to their descendants, and so on is very important. You know, there are only limited things that we can see and touch in this world. A lot of the things in the world are made through words, through ideas in our mind. If we invent the world in our mind through ideas that we take from colonizers, from people who are privileged by the system, then we'll continue to reproduce the system and become part of it. So to free ourselves, we need to remember different stories. We see civilization or we see progress in the world, but our ancestors paid for it. It is also something to which our property, our life, our story, our existence was part of. You know, all the progresses that people talk of Western progress and so on is not really a Western progress. Without the slaves, without the resources, without the rubber, the plantations, everything coming from these countries, we wouldn't have a progress or civilization of any sort. So we are not outsiders, primitive people, simply left to remember the wounds of the past. We are people who lost our words, our ability to talk about our own achievements. So it's important to do that. And I can give you the example of Ethiopia, because Ethiopians wrote several books before the British knew the alphabet. Ethiopians were Christians before many Europeans know anything about God. Ethiopians, though, accepted or invented Christianity in their own way, not by taking it the way the West used Christianity for genocide, which they did in Latin America, in Africa, and many parts of the world, including, especially starting from the First Crusade. But in Ethiopia, it became part of the tradition of relating with nature, with place, with the Ark of the Covenant, and they were able to accept Muslims who were prosecuted in other regions, accept them, make them part of their family, and also other religions which came later. So, you know, but the books and knowledges that were produced by Ethiopians, including books on medicine, are stolen by Westerners. And when current Ethiopian students, young people, are educated by the West, Western knowledge, Western language in English, then they start to forget. They start to understand their own history, their own background, and then they become militant, even fighters of their own heritage. So the colonization of the mind, the African mind, has a very serious effect on our lives. So in many parts of the world today, people hear about Ethiopia, great things about Ethiopia, but they cannot really read the books. About 1 million books were written by Ethiopians of the past, but they're totally excluded from the system. So they cannot read those books and be part of the Ethiopia that lived and thrived in the past. So I think for me, in general, when we think about ourselves,
in few points, if you can just say what the viewers counted, what we should do about it. What you explained is interesting, but just like in point is this and this and this.
Yeah, I think it's important to learn our history. Mm-hmm. It's important to learn it from our own experience. Mm-hmm. And also it is important to create a sense of community with one another. Mm-hmm. We should really overcome the sense of isolation that is created upon us and embrace one another as communities. Whether we like it or not, the world is a very racially hierarchized world, and we don't know what tomorrow will bring with existing issues, especially mm-hmm. COVID-19. Okay. When crises happen, things like this happen, often to get out of crisis, people who have power do everything possible without considering ethical and other constraints. So we have to be vigilant of how power is exercised at this time, mm-hmm. stand for one another with brothers and sisters anywhere in the world, and also not give up hope. Because the hope of Black people is not in the power of their oppressors. Their hope is in their own ability to survive, to struggle, and to triumph, mm-hmm. in their past history and in their ability to come together as families and as communities. So it is important to build on those strengths and understand that, our life is, struggle has become a way of life for Black people. And it is important to also rejoice with every little victories that we achieve every day. And I think that's all I can say.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yirga Gelaw. That was an interesting and very educative interviews that we have, and I think also enlightening. I encourage everyone to get their copy of Native Colonialism. It's really an interesting book. It will change the way we look at ourselves as an African, but also for everyone. We will put the link where it's available, how you can get it below this video. And as a final word, I would like to say this, and I'm gonna borrow these phrases and rephrase it from your own post. I think it's important really that we make a trend of asking whenever we get something as a present from outside, which seems that benefit our society. It's our right to ask about it. Does it really benefit us? How do we localize it? Does it even agree with our values? And also to reason about things, and to make just that trend of asking and reasoning about things. I think media also have a lot of contribution, and also researchers to research about it. Then by doing that, we can save lives. This can be our siblings tomorrow morning, whose life will be put at risk, our relatives, our friends, and maybe ourselves. So that's an important thing. And thank you very much for having you here. It was really a blessing, and I think we will meet again on other topics. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mahlet. Thank you.
All right. Okay, thanks.
I hope this will be a wake-up call for Africa. Those of you who find this video interesting, please subscribe to our channel for more videos. And if you like it, give it a like and also a comment below. Thank you. Until next time. Peace.